Now that we have defined input devices, let's look at some input modes. Input devices contain a trigger which can be used to send a signal to the operating system, such as a button on a mouse or pressing or release of a key. When triggered, input devices return information, their measure, to the system. For example, a mouse returns the position information, a keyboard returns an ASCII code. Apart from talking about the actual physical device or the logical device that we obtain input from, we can also talk about how and when we want to obtain the input. There are two modes for obtaining graphical input. The request mode. The request mode is when we ask the user to provide the input at a specific point of the program. In this case, the program would just hang there until the input is supplied by the user. The second one is the event mode. In the event mode, the computer program has to deal with a number of events. Thus, it is better to let GLUT handle the event queue and invoke the appropriate callback functions when the event of interest has happened. For request mode input, the input value is provided to the program only when the user triggers the device. A typical example is keyboard input. The application program requests a keyboard input from the user. The user can type, erase, backspace, correct the input, and the application program just hangs there until the user enters the input or triggers the input. This diagram graphically shows the request mode. The program is sending a request to the measure process. The application program processes the input from the user, and when the user presses the trigger, this input is given to the measure process, which just sends it to the program, and now the program can proceed further. You may have already guessed, request mode is not suitable for programs that need to interact with the user. Most systems have more than one input devices, such as the mouse, keyboard, the screen, and so on. Each of these devices can be triggered at an arbitrary time by the user. In event mode input, the program specifies a number of input events that are of interest. The program gets into an event handling loop to deal with the events one at a time. Each trigger generates an event whose measure is put in an event queue, which can be examined by the user program. The difference between this diagram and the diagram in the previous slide is that the program specifies the types of events it is interested in. At the lower level, the appropriate library function, GLUT in this case, looks at the event queue to see whether there is an event that is of interest to the program. This is the event queue. If there is, a measure would be returned and the appropriate callback function would be executed. Notice that if there is no trigger coming down from the trigger process, it means that there is no event. Let's look at some example events. Window event. This event is generated when we resize a window, or when we expose a window, or when we iconify a window. Mouse event is generated when we click a mouse or when we move the mouse. Motion event. This refers to the mouse move event when the cursor is inside the window of the application program. Keyboard event. This is generated with the press or the release of a key. Idle event. When nothing happens, it itself is an event, and we may define a callback function that would be executed when the system is idle.